Hi, and welcome to Beef Bootcamp. My name is Whitney Peck, and today we're joined by Laurent to discuss the importance of managing and creating a good working facility and how to keep yourself safe while handling cattle.
It's good to have you here with me today. Would you mind giving us a little bit of your introduction, your background, and how you got involved with UK Extension?
Okay, so I grew up on a small farm in Louisiana and graduated from LSU and moved to Kentucky. Oh, I guess it was in '91, so I've been here a good while. But went to work for Extension, and originally it was with swine extension and beef extension. Now primarily I'd say 95% of what I do is beef extension related. So, all right.
So you're a young beef producer, you've got your first herd. The biggest problem we see is safetyness. So how do you keep yourself safe when you're handling cattle?
So, I mean, being safe around our cattle is very important, not only for obviously for the handler, but also for the cattle that we're working. Safety is a huge issue. Proper facilities and understanding of cattle behavior is very critical to doing a good job handling our cattle, being able to take care of them like we should.
So you've mentioned the importance of a working facility and having a good one. What are some key components that we look for when we're building that working facility and designing it?
Okay, so whenever we design our facility, location is really important. We got to make sure if at all possible, if it can be centrally located, that would be key. It needs to be in an accessible area where we can get our truck and trailer to get move cattle in and out. Those things, and it'd be really good if we can have it built in our system of pastures, whatever, where cattle can flow through that facility from time to time, to where they're used to going in that area. I think a lot of times when we think about handling facilities, a lot of producers want to go straight to what kind of tub or squeeze chute or head gate, and that's very important. But I think sometimes we need to look more at where our location, how our design, and where it fits into the landscape. And what I mean by that is we need a trap or some kind of approach pen to our actual holding pen or working pen that the cattle that feel very comfortable going into. So we need to be able to catch the cattle. I mean, obviously, if we can't catch them, and we hear lots of horror stories about folks trying to load out and whatnot and not being able to catch their calves and whatever. But we need something that cattle will move into, but then they're in a trap where we can easily get behind them and make them flow into the actual holding pen to start the whole working process.
We hear a lot of talk about an indoor pen, an outside pen. Is there one that you would say that beef producers need to prefer when they're doing their designing or not?
Well, I mean, it depends on what you have on the farm. I mean, we have a lot of tobacco barns that are not being used. Obviously, we're very tempted to put our facilities inside to be out of the weather. And it's great to have our chute and maybe even our bud box or crowding tub and stacking alley, single file alley inside. And that makes it good for inclement weather and whatnot. But, getting cattle, when we do that, we have to design and have a mind on how we're going to design it to get the cattle to go into that building. And sometimes that can be a problem. Cattle don't like to drive from a daylight or a lighted area to a dark area. So we may have to, maybe have some lighting inside that building to where that's not going to be blind, but cattle or have our pen designed to where we have them tight enough to where we can push them into the barn, and again start the process of putting them in a single file to where we can actually handle them. So it presents some challenges, but I think if we've got a barn on the farm, I think we can actually use that to our advantage.
Okay, so you talked a little bit about having a good cow that will behave, right? So what are some behavioral traits that we need to look for when we're working cows?
So I think we need to always remember cattle are prey animals. And what I mean by that is, if you think about, let's just think about Africa and the lion and the wildebeest or the gazelles, right? So the cattle are that wildebeest or gazelle, right? So the way a cow feels safe if it's in with other cattle. Okay, so being a prey animal, your predator preys on the prey animal, right? And the way they try to stay safe is if they can run faster or stay with the group, hopefully the lion catches the straggler, right? And I mean, that's just their natural instinct. So we need to be wary of that. So whenever we approach, especially if we approach on foot, on cattle that aren't used to seeing people on foot. You'll see that a lot.
Right.
Cattle have this thing, and a lot of, most animals have what we call a flight zone. And the big extremes I like to have people think about is, say a deer out in the field versus cattle. If you've got cattle, obviously cattle are going to have a much smaller flight zone. We can get closer to them before they feel uncomfortable and move away. If we see a deer in the field, actually a lot of times you get out the truck, you get off the tractor, off the side-by-side, and the deer immediately runs, right? They have a huge flight zone. So depending on the temperament of your cattle's flight zones can vary, okay? So think about show cattle that are halter broke, or dairy cows that are handled twice a day. They have a very, if at all, hardly any kind of a flight zone. Most beef cattle are going to have a substantially bigger flight zone. So the key to, I think, is especially if you're a cow-calf person, and even if you're a stocker backgrounder, establishing some kind of a low-stress, environment anytime you're around them, I think we can shrink that flight zone to where we can have the cattle more manageable. Even with stocker cattle that we're receiving cattle that from, unknown sources, I think how we work and interact with those cattle, moving slow and methodical as opposed to just banging and trying to get the thing, everything done quickly and all that, just slow down. And I think cattle will feed off of that. You'll always have some crazy ones, right? If you own your cattle, if a cow-calf herd, you can get rid of the crazy ones, right? So we can kind of eliminate that. That's hopefully what we'll do long term. If you're a person that's purchasing cattle background in a stocker, we may not want to, we may have to deal with that, but I think we can gentle these cattle down. There's some pretty cool research trials that show that some of these methods can actually gentle these cattle down. And actually it allows you to see sickness better in those kind of calves too, and purchase cattle, because that's another defense mechanism. If a calf gets sick and they're not comfortable being around you, a lot of times they'll try not to act sick, if you will, right? And so seeing them act more natural, we can spot the ones that might need some treatment or whatnot.
You mentioned some of those methods to check to see the disposition, or how to get them more calm. Do you know any of those at the top of your head that would work?
Yeah, one thing I do, we working with folks that are in our bred heifer sale. I really, and cow-calf people in general, if you're raising your own heifers, I think it's really important that first winter. Let's just use a spring calving scenario. Most of our cow-calf folks calve in the spring, so we wean the calves in October. Instead of just feeding everything from the fence line or the hay ring, actually put some portable bunks in there, or even if we don't want to do the bunks, just drive out in the field and get off the side-by-side, get out of the truck and pour some feed on the ground. Interact with the cattle 2-3 times a week, and especially that first winter, that first 6 months after they've been weaned. And a lot of times that is a huge learning time period that we can gentle these calves down. And it's funny, I've seen some folks I've worked with in general who have moved to some more automated way of feeding, whether it's fence line bunks or not, and then they'll complain a year or two later, my calves are a whole lot more nervous than they used to be. And a lot of times because we're all in a hurry, and we run the tractor or the cube feeder, and we're doing everything from this side of the fence, and we're not in the field with them. So there's no replacement for getting on foot and interacting with the cattle, on some kind of regular basis.
So we talked a little bit about our barn and our designing our facilities. What are some components that we need to keep in mind that our facility needs to have?
Okay, so good question. So if we're going to actually put together a handling facility on the farm, I talked earlier about having some kind of access trap to get to our actually holding facilities. Now the actual working facility, obviously it's going to be built out of something that's a very strong, sturdy physical barrier. It could be heavy duty corral panels that you can buy commercially. It can be some of this continuous fencing rail that's getting very popular now. Some people have used guardrail in the past, reinforced wire panels, cattle panels. But regardless, it's going to be physical and it's going to be very visible, okay? So that's going to be the outline perimeter of what we have. So we will move them from this trap into some kind of holding pen, and then that crowding or holding pen is going to move into either we got to get the cattle in single file. So I'm just trying to flow a calf through this. We got him out in the pasture, in the trap, in the holding pen. Now we're coming into a crowding pen or a crowding area to get them in single file. There's two very popular components that can be used for that. One is most common is a crowding tub, a circular sweep or whatever, that you can sweep and get the cattle to go single file into a stacking alley, single file alley. The other one is what's become popular in recent years called a bud box, and it's basically just a rectangular pen that sits perpendicular to your single file alley. And so the concept there is you bring cattle into the bud box, you close the gate, and that gate is aligned perfectly with the single file alley, and then the handler moves in the bud box, and the cattle, the only way they can go is down the single file alley, and it works pretty good, especially on gentle cattle that are used to you. Cattle that are nervous, cattle that, if you are inexperienced handlers, probably the crowding tub is a safer option, right, in general. So we've got that component to get them in single file. The biggest mistake people make if they try to build their own single file alley is making it too wide. You don't want it to where a calf can turn around. And here's the challenge. A lot of times, our cows are wider, our calves are narrow, or smaller. And so a lot of times we get to the point where we can't stack calves because they keep turning around and we've got to unload the whole and start over. So anymore, there are commercial single file stacking alleys that are very good at, you can adjust the sides on very easily. And those are, in this day and age, they're probably money well spent to just go and invest something that's commercially built, unless you're really handy and want the challenge of building an angled, type stacking alley. But that alley needs to hold, anywhere. It needs to be at least 20 feet long. Okay, so that could hold 3 to 5 cows, or maybe 5 to 6 yearlings or calves or whatnot. But we need to have something where we can bring something into either the bud box or the crowding tub, load that alley, and then work those, and then come back and do it over again. So that's here. Now the last and final important component from the single file alley is going into our squeeze chute or head gate. Now we can get by with just a head gate, okay? But I would encourage folks again to probably look at buying some kind of a squeeze chute. A squeeze chute would it makes things a little more safer. It allows you, especially if you're getting vets to come out and doing some work, in terms of preg checking and whatnot, and allow you a little better access from a palpation standpoint to get behind the cattle. Obviously, it gives you the option of squeezing those calves, and actually that gets cattle a little bit more in control when we use the squeeze. And then, of course, the head gate is what's holding the calf in place. Head gate and how it's designed is super important. I really encourage people to get head gates where the stanchions are completely vertical and there's no bevel or slant to them. And the reason for that, if a calf goes down or a cow goes down and they're on a bevel type head gate, they can choke pretty quick. In a matter of seconds, 10, 15, 20 seconds, we've got a cow that's choked. You choke the oxygen supply, and then you've got a potential problem. So there are self-catching head gates. I'm not a huge fan of them. Some people are fine with them. I like a more of a manual stanchion where the scissors or whatever you want to call it, head gate. And again, that's personal preference. But a good squeeze chute, a good head gate in front of that stacking alley, and I think we've kind of got the main components. Now, if you're a cow-calf person, you really need a couple of holding pens. You need to be able to sort cows and calves coming out of and design your facilities where when they exit, they can go, you can go one or two or three different places with them from a sorting standpoint, from a practical standpoint.
There's a lot of importance about getting BQA certified. So why is it important to get BQA certified as a young producer?
Okay, so BQA is a national program that stands for Beef Quality Assurance. In Kentucky, we had to do it a little different, and so we added a C to that. We call it BQCA, Beef Quality and Care Assurance. And the quick history of that is because we had what we called a cattle handling and care program that started in 2012. And it was started from producers approaching us in extension saying we need to tell our message on how we care for our animals. And so we ran the cattle handling care for several years, and we realized we really had the same message on the BQA side and the cattle handling care. So we put the two together. And what's interesting is we did that back in like 2014, 2015. The national program and BQA program has brought more and more care into it. I'm not saying it was because of us, but it was coincidental, I'm sure. But the big thing is consumers want to know how their cattle or how their beef is being raised, right? And so we need to meet that demand. I mean, if we don't have our consumer confidence, they're not going to buy our product, and we're going to be out of business, right? It's just pretty simple. So it is super important. Another quick BQA success story is where we give shots, and I'll just give you a real concrete example of that. Back in the past, we routinely would stack cattle. I'm old enough to remember as a kid, we'd stack cattle in a stacking alley, and we'd pop them in the top of the hip, right? Because it was easy. You only had to catch one head, and you could do 4 or 5 and turn them out, right? And we didn't realize we were damaging muscle, and so we had an injection site blemish incidence in the industry of over 20%. And so by moving that injection site in front of the shoulder into the neck, into the low price cut regions of the animal, we've reduced our injection site blemish. But here's the other thing. We've also, most of our vaccines and antibiotics now have subcutaneous route of administration as opposed to intramuscular. Years ago, almost everything was intramuscular. So anytime we put a needle in the muscle, we're going to damage that muscle. And we didn't realize that. So all that evolved, through meat science and research and whatnot. And so to now, in this day and age, fast forward to now, our injection site blemishes from the National Beef Quality Audits for several different audits we've had is less than 2%. So that's a huge success story. And that's just one little small concrete example of what BQA is.
Right.
BQA encompasses everything, though, in terms of care and withdrawal times and everything, how we handle the cattle.
So how does a producer get BQA certified?
They can see their county agent. I mean, it's the easiest thing to do is see your local county agent, and they can set you up with the training. Most all of our county agents in Kentucky are certified trainers for BQCA, and so see your county agent, and they will fix you up. So.
Thank you for watching this episode of Beef Bootcamp. Remember, after each video in this series, there's an opportunity to fill out an evaluation form. For every evaluation form that you fill out, your name will be put in a drawing to win a portable Blackstone grill. The deadline for that drawing is July 18th. If you fill out all the evaluation forms in the series, and there are 6 of them in this Beef Bootcamp series, you will automatically be receiving a UK Extension sorting flag. Thank you for watching.